Jesus is King. Welcome to the 21st week after Pentecost. It's a great week, great day to be a Catholic. This show is an attempt to celebrate God's providence over the future. Blessed Solanus Casey always said, thank God beforehand. We got to thank God beforehand, before everything that happens. And there's this great line in the last battle, where who's it, King Rillian? I forgot. When they're seeing the forces of Antichrist gathering, and he even commits a great sin by killing the Saracen out of anger, and then he says, "Let's take the adventure that Aslan brings us. Let's ride forth and take the adventure that Aslan brings us." So this is your show to ride forth and take the adventure that God brings us. Thanks be to God. God's providence is over everything. There's some trouble brewing in the Vatican. Some are scared of what's going on because there's a document coming out tomorrow. Or there's the Nostra Aetate celebration that's coming soon. But thanks be to God, Jesus is on the throne, no matter what happens. So what's new with Pelican? So first of all, we added some new contributors to Pelican. We have the Pelican Brief with Mr. Murray Rundis. Great guy. I really like Mr. Rundis' work. He is a young man, but very smart. I've been very impressed by his work over a few years. I think I've been following the newscast with him and Dr. McCall. There are very few people as young and as smart at the same time as him. And it was so funny. I was doing a podcast with him, and he pulled out this. We were talking on his podcast, and he pulled out this extremely obscure book by Dietrich von Hildebrand, which is also extremely difficult. And he's just like, "Oh, I love this text from Dietrich von Hildebrand." I was like, "Wow, this kid is like real awesome." So Murray Rundis, he has his first piece here. Why Catholics deserve more than a daily wire. So he's talking about why did we start Pelican Plus, talking about some of the things. So you can click here on Listen to listen to the article. This is the new feature that we're rolling out now, is the blog feature. So Pelican Plus is designed to be a Catholic alternative to Daily Wire, but not only to Daily Wire, a Catholic alternative to Audible, a Catholic alternative to YouTube, a Catholic alternative to Netflix, and a Catholic alternative to Substack. So on Pelican Plus, you can click on the reading icon. So you go to read here and you get all the written content, which is just like Substack. But here's the big exciting news, much more exciting right here. Benedictines of Mary. So we have their music on Pelican now, which is really, really exciting. And then lastly, I just want to note this right here. If you go to Pray, and you go down here to the Bible. We have all four Gospels from Kennedy Hall in the Douay-Rheims-Challoner version. And I just want to tell you that if you're ever on a long drive, you have to try doing one of these Gospels straight through. This is really, actually, we talk about the traditional lectionary versus the new lectionary. Actually, the most traditional lectionary is to read the entire book all the way through in one sitting. That's what's really traditional, because this is exactly what our forefathers would have done. So St. Luke wrote his Gospel. He sent it to Theophilus. Theophilus said, "Hey, guess what, guys?" He gathers all his friends together, and he says, "Guess what? Luke sent me his whatever they would have called it then, Gospel or whatever." And then so he gathers all his friends together. Theophilus is probably a nobleman, so he has hundreds of friends. Gets them all together. They all get together, and then they all sit down, and then someone just reads the entire thing straight through. And that's how they did it, really traditionally. And that's how they did it with the epistles. St. Paul actually makes reference to this very thing. He says, when this is read in the church of God. So they would have done this. So what Pelican allows us to do is it actually using the technology against the Marxists and the Antichrist who designed it, using it against them. God's bringing good out of evil by creating this technology so that we can actually enter into something that's actually pre-literate. It's pre-literate. That's what's so amazing about this type of technology that I'm excited about. So, okay, let's talk about the saints. So it's the 21st week after Pentecost. So today is the All Souls Day observed. Don't forget to go to the cemetery during the octave of all saints. This is where you can get the indulgence. The indulgences are all listed in this text right here. These are the current indulgences. So a lot of people have the Reculta. The Reculta has a lot of great pairs, but those are not the current indulgences. In order to gain an indulgence, you have to use the current books that are currently enforced from the Apostolic Penitentiary. And they're all contained in this book. And as you can see, the USCCB did not spend a lot of money on graphic design here because it's, not exactly a beautiful book. I guess the USCCB was not excited about indulgences. I don't know why. But this one has all the current indulgences. And so in order to gain the indulgence for the poor souls during the octave of All Saints, you just have to go to a cemetery and pray for the poor souls. It's actually pretty easy. It's one of the easiest indulgences you can get for the poor souls. So don't miss the opportunity to gain indulgences. When you gain an indulgence for the poor souls, that soul pays what it is due in the for the faithful departed. So let me just read this real quick. This is at page 99. A plenary indulgence applicable only to the souls in purgatory is granted to the faithful who, number 1, on any and each day of November 1 to 8, devoutly visit a cemetery and pray, if only mentally, for the departed. So all you have to do is go to a cemetery in this octave and pray for the departed. You can say anything you want to pray for them. And then number 2, second option, on All Souls Day, which is today, devoutly visit a church or an oratory and recite an Our Father and a creed. Now this also goes with the other three requirements for a plenary indulgence, which is you have to go to confession within at least a week within this time. You have to receive Holy Communion on the day of the indulgence, and then you pray for the intentions of the Holy Father, which you can say, Our Father, Hail Mary, glory be, for the intentions of the Holy Father. Don't worry, the intentions of the Holy Father are always according to his office. So no matter if we have a bad pope or whatever, you can always gain an indulgence, and you're always praying for his intentions according to his office, which are always spreading the gospel and uprooting heresy and converting heretics and converting pagans. So that's always the intentions of the Holy Father. No matter if he adds additional intentions on top of that, that's fine. So don't worry about all that. So here is here's the beautiful custom here. As you can see in Michaela Harrison's rendering, the whole family is going to visit the cemetery and offering their suffrages for the Holy Souls. So it's a great day to go to the cemetery with the family today, or even just any day within the octave of All Saints. So I wanted to mention, let's see, so we're going to talk about Saint Martin de Porres in a minute. That's going to be our main controversial section because we're going to talk about slavery. This is kind of the week of slavery, as you'll see. But first, Pierre-François Néron, a martyr in Vietnam, born in Bornay in the Jura region of France, 1818. He joined the Foreign Mission of Paris, and he was ordained a priest in 1848. Sent first to Hong Kong, he went to Vietnam and served as the director of the main seminary in the kingdom until he was arrested and beheaded by authorities in 1869. So there's all these great martyrs of Southeast Asia. There's martyrs of Vietnam, martyrs of I guess Korea is not Southeast Asia, but we got Vietnam, we got Korea. We have these holy new martyrs meaning the modern period, and they shed their blood, and the seeds of this blood is still sprouting. The fruits of this blood. In North America, we have the North American martyrs, and their blood consecrated Canada and the United States, and that blood, that seed, is still growing, and it's been coming to fruition, especially in the early days of the United States and also in America in the 1950s, when it was really spreading its wings, shall we say, against all the Marxists. So these are new martyrs in the East Asia region, and so we're seeing we're hoping that they will be, their blood will sprout forth a great feast of the faith in our time. So we're going to talk about more saints of the slavery in just a minute. So first of all, this is from the 4th day of November. We have Aimée Adèle La Boutier, French religious sister of the city's Sisters of Marie Magdalene Postel. She assumed the religious name Marthe and became noted for her work for the congregation in a range of capacities. She was a close friend of Placide Viel, who was her novice mistress. This would bring her to a conflict with Viel's elder cousin, who is at odds with Viel. Nevertheless, the religious attempted to live a model life based on the tenets of the gospel. So she's a new blessed, beatified in 1990. And I always love this. There's so many great martyrs, and you can hear them in the Roman Martyrology, the audio on Pelican Plus. But I always love this when we have a married couple martyrs. So 5th day of November, at Emesa in Phoenicia, the holy martyrs Galatio and Epistemus, his wife, who in the persecution of Decius were beaten with scourges, their hands, feet, and tongues mutilated, and finally achieved martyrdom by beheading. So, husband and wife consecrating their blood together for Christ. Now, what's really great is that we have this great tradition that is lost of commemorating in the month of November all these different particular saints, particular groups of saints. So in this book, Restoring Lost Customs of Christendom, Matthew Pleasy brings out the fact that there's all these different dates, all saints' days for religious orders and nations. So on the 5th of November, we have all Jesuit saints. And it's really cool because if you look it up on Matthew Pleasy's blog, you have the litany of all Jesuit saints. You have, in this week, we're also going to have the date of all Irish saints and all English saints. So if you have particular devotions to particular orders, I mean, we definitely need to do this litany to all the Jesuit saints, because the Jesuit order, unfortunately, is rather corrupted, at least in America, unfortunately. Now, we also have the Feast of the Holy Relics preserved in the diocese. This is a great local custom on Wednesday, 5th of November. So it's a great thing to celebrate the relics in your own diocese. Find out, call your chancery if you don't know what we have in your own diocese. And let's see. So then on Thursday is all Irish saints, and then on Saturday is all English saints. So we got those, and then later on this month we're going to have all the Dominican saints, all the Benedictine saints, all the various other saints. There's all these different dates that are commemorating those saints. So it's really great. Now, I wanted to read this two Byzantine customs. So the first one is on Thursday. We have a Patriarch of Constantinople. Now, why is this significant? It's significant because there are very few patriarchs of Constantinople that are saints. Why? Because the emperor at Constantinople made the Patriarch of Constantinople into his bureaucrat. So the emperor, even into the years 800, this is the famous Photian schism with the East and West, which had to do with that very thing. St. Ignatius, the Patriarch of Constantinople, rebuked the emperor for his wickedness, and so the emperor just dismissed him like any other bureaucrat and put in Photius. So there's very few patriarchs of Constantinople who are saints, and so we need to note this. The most famous one you've probably heard of, St. John Chrysostom. He was the Patriarch of Constantinople. Also, St. Gregory the Theologian, aka St. Gregory Nazianzus, he was also a patriarch, but there's very few of them. So let's just, and you're going to see in this, when we read this story, you're going to see what I mean. So St. Paul the Confessor, Patriarch of Constantinople, commemorated in the Byzantine East on November 6th, which is Thursday. St. Paul the Confessor, Archbishop of Constantinople, was chosen to the patriarchal throne after the death of Patriarch Alexander, when the Arian heresy had again flared up. Many of the Arians were present at the council which selected the new Archbishop of Constantinople. They revolted in opposition to the choice of St. Paul, but the Orthodox at the council were in the majority. Now remember, the term Orthodox means that's just the term for Catholics in the East that is used even in the Catholic liturgy. The Catholic liturgy itself prays for all Orthodox Christians. So the term Orthodox is just referring to Catholics who are in the East. Okay? All right. The Emperor Constantius, ruling over the eastern half of the Roman Empire, was an Arian. He was not in Constantinople for the election of the archbishop, and so it took place without his consent. Upon his return, he convened a council which illegally deposed St. Paul, and the emperor banished him from the capital. In place of the saint, they elevated Eusebius of Nicomedia, an impious heretic. Archbishop Paul withdrew to Rome, where other Orthodox bishops were also banished by Eusebius. This is again and again a story. The Orthodox in the East take refuge in Rome. It happens during the 400s. It happens during the 500s. It happens during the 600s. One of the greatest of that era, St. Maximus Confessor. It happens during the 700s, during the iconoclasm. Again and again, the Orthodox East, the saints of the Orthodox East take refuge in Rome because Rome is Orthodox. Eusebius did not rule the Church of Constantinople for long. When he died, St. Paul returned to Constantinople and was greeted by his flock with love. But Constantius exiled the saint a second time, and so he returned to Rome. The Western Emperor Constans wrote a harsh letter to his Eastern co-ruler, which he sent to Constantinople along with the holy exiled archpastor. The threats worked, and St. Paul was reinstated upon the archiepiscopal throne. But soon the pious Emperor Constans, a defender of the Orthodox, was treacherously murdered during a palace coup. They again banished St. Paul from Constantinople, and this time sent him off in exile to Armenia, to the city of Caucasus, where he endured a martyr's death. When the archbishop was celebrating the divine liturgy, Arians rushed upon him by force and strangled him with his own omophorion. This occurred in the year 350. Okay, so you can read more if you go to oca.org. The Orthodox Church in America has some of the best website for saints' lives. And don't worry, all of these saints are Catholic saints. If we're talking about the Roman martyrology here. First of all, what is an omophorion? An omophorion is a liturgical vestment that the Byzantine East uses. It's kind of like I think it's the stole. What's the long garment that's kind of, I don't know the term, but this is the omophorion is what is used. The Latin priests use this vestment that goes over. That's what he used for confession. But then the Arians strangled him with his own vestment. So this is the type of bloodshed that our forefathers had to deal with during these times. So Vatican II, we got all these problems with Vatican II, but at least there wasn't a lot of bloodshed. I thank God for that. We're not killing each other in the mass. Okay, so next thing I wanted to mention was this, which is on Saturday, the Synaxis of the Archangel Michael and the other bodiless powers. So this is the Byzantine custom. A Synaxis is a feast day which takes place, which is sort of a Synaxis means to sort of gather as a gathering. It's often a commemoration of many saints, but it can sometimes be a commemoration of saints that were kind of left out from a main celebration. And this is a really cool custom because in the Byzantine East, you have all these sort of so-called apocryphal angels are venerated. So here's the icon with Christ in the middle here, and we have all the other angels, and they're named. So it's the obviously we know Michael, but we have Gabriel and Raphael, but then we have Uriel, Salathiel, Jehudiel, Barachiel, and Jeremiel. And this was established at the beginning of the 4th century at the Council of Laodicea, which met several years before the First Ecumenical Council. The 35th canon of the Council of Laodicea condemned and denounced as heretical the worship of angels as gods and rulers of the world, but affirmed their proper veneration. A feast day was established in November, the 9th month after March, with which the year began in ancient times, since there are 9 ranks of angels. The 8th day of the month was chosen for the Synaxis of the bodily powers, since the day of the dread last judgment is called the 8th day by the Holy Fathers. After the end of this age, characterized by its 7 days of creation, will come with the 8th day, and then the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him. So, this is what our Byzantine brethren are celebrating. So it's very much like our September 29 for the Latins, and takes place on November 8. So I wanted to mention this book because it had such a huge power on me. If I can get it quickly. Where is Devotion to the Angels? Here it is. Okay. This text is so incredibly good. Devotion to the holy angels. It's not going to focus on me, I guess. So I'm working on all this high-tech systems now that I'm with Pelican here. So Devotions to the Holy Angels, published by Aruka Press from various sources. The editor is some priest. I don't know where he put his name, but this text is so incredibly good. For Pelican Plus, when we launched Pelican Plus, we did the St. Michael's fast to offer it up for Pelican, and during that time, it was the first time I had done the St. Michael fast, and during that time, I did a daily reading from this book, and it was just incredible to really get to know the angels more and really learn about them and learn about all their different aspects, and it really made me love the angels and also feel their love. So if you want to learn about the angels, grow in your devotion to the angels, this book is absolutely essential. So now let's talk about Saint Martin de Porres and slavery. So first, let's read the saints that had to do with slavery this week. So Saint Martin de Porres Velasquez died in 1639. He was a Peruvian lay brother of the Dominican order who was beatified in 1837 by Pope Gregory XVI and was canonized in 1962 by Pope John XXIII. He's the patron saint of mixed race peoples, barbers, innkeepers, public health workers, and all those seeking racial harmony, and animals. Great. That's a lot of wonderful patronage from St. Martin. And let me just read two other saints. Actually, three other saints. So the interesting thing is that his feast day is on the 3rd of November. That's because he died. St. Martin died on this day, the 3rd of November. But on the very next day, there's these important saints that talk about slavery. So at Bologna, Saint Vitalis and Agricola, martyrs, the former of whom was previously the slave of the latter. So Vitalis was the slave of Agricola, all right? And if you read the Roman Martyrology, it talks about how they both underwent martyrdom. And then we have fast forward to the so-called medieval time, and then we have Saint Felix of Valois, founder of the Order of the Most Holy Trinity of Redemption of Captives, whose feast by decree on November 20. So Saint Felix of Valois, he founded this order, the Redemption of Captives. So this whole period right here, so we've got the three periods of slavery, actually. We've got Vitalis and Agricola, that was the period of ancient slavery. And then we've got St. Felix of Valois, that was the period of the Mohammedan racial slavery. All right. And then we have St. Martin de Porres, which was the time of the so-called transatlantic slave trade. So we have these three different periods of slavery. So these four saints really give us this period of slavery, and we see how the church really shined through the saints in slavery. And I want to mention another book here. If you want to delve a lot deeper into this, it's called The Worst of Indignities, The Catholic Church on Slavery by Paul Kengor. Emmaus Road, St. Paul Center, anything from St. Paul Center is great. So it's very, very important. Why is slavery so important to talk about? It's because Father James Martin, the notorious heretic, uses this as a bait and switch to promote his heresy. What he does is he says, well, the Bible said slavery was okay, so therefore we can promote sodomy, basically is what he says. So if the Bible was wrong about slavery, then the Bible can be wrong about sodomy. So this is why this issue of slavery is so incredibly important. It's so incredibly important. So first of all, we need to understand that slavery itself per se, in and of itself, is not intrinsically evil. This is the most important point before we understand all the rest of the things. Because in our modern period, it is almost impossible for us to understand the economic situation of our ancient forefathers before the modern period. Slavery was the basis of all ancient economies, period. Every single ancient economy was based on slavery. Slavery was based on, you could become a slave in various different ways. Sometimes you more or less voluntarily became a slave because you were poor. You wanted to become a slave. There was the only option for you. Sometimes you were a slave because you had been captured by people. Sometimes you had been bought by people. And in an economic situation, so in our economic situation, we are used to what we call debt slavery or wage slavery, which is basically, it's another form of slavery in which people are actually treated worse than slaves in a sense, because if I own, think about it for a second, in an agrarian economy where we're faced with starvation if our crops don't grow well. All right, so just think about that for a second. I'm living in ancient Israel, and if my crops fail, I might starve. This is the situation that all of our ancient forefathers dealt with. So, if I buy a slave, I have to treat the slave as well as possible, in the sense of I have to provide for his family, his house, his food. I have to make him healthy. I want him to be healthy so he can work. I want him to be happy, because if he's not happy, he's not going to work well. At least this is the way the Israelites treated their slaves, because the slave was treated as a human being in the Mosaic Law. But you could buy a slave. But buying a slave is it's like grafting an employee as a lifetime employee into your household, and you need to provide for him so that he can have what he needs, so he can give you what you need. So this is, and the other factor is that we needed to understand that ancient slavery had zero basis in any race. There was zero racial aspect to this. And there was even slaves could be treated so well that they would be grafted into the very household. There's a provision for this in the Mosaic Law. However, slavery even though in and of itself it is not intrinsically evil, it is a result of original sin. It's a result of the fall. People should not be owning each other. That should not be happening if there is no fall. If we have true justice and mercy and everything's okay and the economy is working okay, there shouldn't be slavery. So it's sort of in and of itself, it's not intrinsically evil, but the institution itself is a result of evil and is evil itself, period. Now, the other factor is that the Holy Scriptures also say, even though the Holy Scriptures say that, or imply that slavery in and of itself is not evil, the Scriptures also say that slave trading is intrinsically evil. This is listed as kidnapping in 1 Timothy, alongside fornication and other intrinsically evil acts. So slave trading is intrinsically evil. In this sense, I am doing violence to a family and kidnapping someone in order to sell them. And the book of Revelation comes how Babylon is fallen, who trafficked in the souls of men. So it is a difficult and complicated issue which cannot be simply resolved by a trite comment from James Martin. We need to understand that the economic system was as it was in the ancient world, that if we were to free all those slaves, like let's just free all the slaves like American abolition. If we freed all the slaves, they would all starve to death. That's exactly what would happen. They would just starve to death and die. And there would probably be a rebellion and political unrest, and just chaos would ensue. So it would just be a disaster if that happened. Because freeing the slave, there was a lot of problems with the American abolition movement as it was at that time anyways, because of the Reconstruction era caused a lot of problems with all of the Jim Crow and lynch mobs and whatnot. Because the way that the church dealt with slavery was to reconcile slave and master as brothers. That is how the church dealt with slavery. The church did not deal with slavery like the American abolitionists through violence, like John Brown, like killing people. No. And neither did the church say we need to create this animosity between slave and master, because that doesn't work either, because the American abolitionism, it freed slavery, but then it created this animosity. And so we had 100 more years of animosity and hatred between whites and blacks in America. And now we still have the problem in America, in the sense that the Marxists can use slavery and racism to whip up the mob. So even if it's a perceived, not a real issue, racism that is, it's still going to be this problem. So how did the church deal with it? So we have this story right here in the Roman Martyrology of Vitalis and Agricola. And they were slave and master, and they reconciled to each other as brothers. And this is just the fulfillment of St. Paul's letter to Philemon. So Philemon was the master of Onesimus, and what happens is Onesimus runs away from him. St. Paul finds Onesimus, the former slave, and he converts Onesimus to be a Christian. And then what does St. Paul say to Onesimus? He says, oh, well, you're a slave and you need to rebel against your master, and, you shouldn't have been a slave anyways because that was intrinsically evil. No. St. Paul does not say that. He says, no, go back to your master. Go back to your master. And he writes a letter to Philemon and says, receive him as a brother, so that they can reconcile. They can reconcile slave and master, and they both become saints. And this is how the church deals with slavery. And so this was the ancient slavery eventually was abolished gradually for the sake of all, to reconcile slave and master. But then the Mohammedans created a racial slavery. So this was what's called this trans-Saharan slave trade, which is completely out of the history books. The history books don't tell this story. You'd have to read my own book, City of God versus City of Man, to get that story. Because the Mohammedans really invent racial slavery. Some say it came from the Talmud with the Jews, and that's a good theory. The evidence that I could find was sparse on that point. But we do know that the Mohammedans, at least, they used racial slavery. They used the concept of the curse of Ham, which is a twisting of the biblical passage of the cursing of Canaan, because Ham is not cursed, Canaan is cursed, his son. So the other sons of Ham are not cursed, and they're not slaves. But the Mohammedans used this racial ideology to justify their racial slave trade, which was the trans-Saharan slave trade. Now, during all this time, the Mohammedans were invading Europe and capturing slaves. And this is the reason for St. Felix of Valois founding the Order of the Most Holy Trinity for the redemption of captives. And there were multiple orders of this kind who were just, they were religious who were sacrificing their lives. So some of them had this rule where they would go to the Mohammedans, and if they couldn't buy the Christian slaves back from the Mohammedans, they would actually sacrifice their own life and put themselves as a slave, and then allow these Christian kidnappees to be taken back. So because slavery was abolished, it was outlawed in Europe. You could not have slavery, but the Mohammedans took the slaves, right? So now eventually the bad Christians, the bad Catholics, realize they can make a ton of money if they join with the Mohammedans in this racial slave trade. And this is the beginning of the transatlantic slave trade. It starts in the Canary Islands. 1435, Pope Eugenius IV condemns this slavery in 1435. But pretty soon the Catholics are trading in slaves and joining in the racial slavery with the Mohammedans. And this is where St. Martin de Porres comes in, who is in Peru. So what happens is the popes condemn slavery multiple times from 1435 all the way into the 1800s, but they also practice slavery. So they are contradicting their own. Some popes actually have slaves themselves. Pope Alexander VI, one of the most notorious, terrible popes of Renaissance, he himself spread the curse of Ham ideology because he was trying to spread his own claims to different Italian cities, because the popes at that time had an army and they were using the army to invade different Catholic towns and cities to take them over. So this is a serious problem at this time. And what ended up happening was that the popes and other good priests and bishops could not stop these bad Catholics from exploiting the Mohammedan racial slave trade, and so the Catholics also joined in with the racial slavery. Now, the big difference, though, is that the priests who were defending the slaves, and Martin de Porres is not a priest, but he's a lay brother of the Dominican order. The priests and other religious who were defending the slaves, they succeeded at least in forcing all of the bad slave traders to baptize and catechize their slaves. They even succeeded in shaming them with their adulteries with their slave women. So this happened in New Orleans, for example. When bad Catholics committed adultery with their slave women and had children by them, those children had to be set free. And so in New Orleans, for example, and in other places like Haiti, Catholic places, those mixed race children created an entire race of people called the Free People of Color. And these people were Catholics. These were mixed race blacks and so-called whites, so-called blacks, so-called whites, African, Spanish African or Franco-African. And they were all free and they were all Catholic. And this type of thing never happened in the American South. Why? Because the Protestant slavery swallowed the curse of Ham ideology completely, hook, line, and sinker. So when the Confederate States of America seceded, which, by the way, I support the Confederacy. I would have supported their cause at the time. But the problem was that they were infected with heresy. And they believed wholeheartedly in the heresy of the curse of Ham, which is a complete heresy. And they believed that this was real, that the blacks were cursed, that they should be enslaved, which is a complete heresy, which caused the destruction of the African race, the African peoples in the American South. So this is the problem with all of our race issues in the United States. And it's because we had a heretical view of race. And this is coming now even more as we talk more about race, as many right-wingers keep talking about race and white people and all this stuff. But if we look to these saints, we look to the history of the Catholic tradition, we can see that all of these things you don't need to be in any issues. You can go on Pelican Plus and you can see the Catholic take on race. This is not available publicly. Here is if you go to Pelican Plus and you scroll down to Terror of Demons. So this one right here, Catholic take on race, where we talk a lot deeper about all these racial issues, me and Kennedy, and we talk more about all this stuff. It's very, very important that we deal with this properly because there's more and more racialism going on, which is strange. But it is what it is, and this is a situation that we need to go deeper into. So that is all we have today. So thanks be to God for a new week. God bless everybody, and have a good one. Viva Cristo Rey.